These are the Little Orphan Annie comic strips for the week of September 7th, 1925. We're finally going to meet Count de Tour. I know we've had a lot of Selby, but trust me, Count de Tour is the main villain of the storyline. So we start with Mrs. Warbucks getting a phone call. She says, "Hello? Yes, this is Mrs. Warbucks. What's that? I don't understand you." "Oh, Count de Tour, what a wonderful surprise. When did you land? You say you're in town? You must come right out. Wednesday?" Mr. Warbucks enters the room as she hangs up the phone. "Oh, Oliver, it's Count de Tour. You know I met him in Paris. You'll be crazy about him." Mr. Warbucks says, "Yeah? Well, if I am, he'll be the first detour I was ever crazy about." She says, "The Count is one of the most successful businessmen in Europe, but unlike the businessmen you associate with, he is a polished gentleman." He responds, "Yeah? A Polish gentleman, did you say? I've heard of him." Daddy Warbucks making dad jokes. So I do want to point out that in the book I edited, I did more than just change the strips into black and white. You can see we've got lines in the original strips, some blurriness with the lettering as well. So I had to do a fair amount of photo editing for the collection. Please buy the collection if you're interested. The link is in the description of the video. The next day, Mrs. Warbucks is talking to Selby. She says, "Selby, I have a surprise for you. The Count de Tour is arriving tomorrow to be our guest. I presume you have heard of him." "Ah, rather. In fact, I have met the Count." "Oh, then you know him. How delightful." "Yes, a delightful chap, the Count. He is a rising power in the realm of the world of business, you know. A very brilliant fellow. I predict that within a very few years he will have crushed all competition and be the world's financial dictator. He is remorseless in a business war. Nothing can stop him." Annie has been listening to this conversation. She's been hiding behind a couch. Once Mrs. Warbucks and Selby leave the room, Annie talks to herself. She says, so this Count is a big gun businessman, eh? And he's going to be the biggest guy in the world. Guess he hasn't run into Daddy yet. When he does this detour, bird'll detour, I betcha." On Wednesday, the Count arrives. He kisses Mrs. Warbucks' hand while saying, "Ah, Mrs. Warbucks, this is indeed the supreme pleasure of my life." She says, "Oh, Count, you always say the nicest things." But then he shakes hands with Daddy Warbucks, and Daddy grabs his hand very, very tightly. We have like stars of pain coming out from that very firm handshake. The Count says, "Oh, so this is the Honorable Oliver Warbucks, of whom I have heard so much." Daddy Warbucks says, "Well, I've heard your name mentioned too, old kid. How's things in Europe, Count?" Everybody starts walking to the left, presumably going to the dining room, as Daddy says, "Right this way, Count. The grub's on the table and getting cold." But Count de Tour turns to the right and he makes a secret hand signal to Selby, who returns it. Annie sees this. She's got a question mark over her head. She wonders, did you see those two birds talking signs to each other? Gee, that looks sort of phony to me. Guess I'll keep my eyes on this Count, baby. I hope you enjoyed that brief little look at the collection. Back to the original scans. The next day, Selby is talking with Count de Tour. He says, "I say, Count, what do you think of the layout? The old gent is rather a tough customer, eh? What?" The Count sits up. He says, "Oh, he will be easily manipulated, I fancy. But tell me, what have you been able to discover about the place? Any papers, maps, documents of any kind, such as we talked of before you sailed for America?" That's right, Selby is not just an innocent house guest. The Count purposely sent Selby here to spy on the Warbuckses. Selby says, "Shh, not so loud. You never know where that little brat is." The two of them leave the room. The Count says, "Quite right, Adalbert. We will seek the open. Even closed doors have keyholes." And maybe they made the right decision to sneak away in secret because Little Orphan Annie is peeking at them through the nearest doorway. She's not the only curious one. On Friday, we have Daddy Warbucks in his office reading some papers. He says, "The missus says in Europe, businessmen are all honorable gentlemen. Well, here's a confidential report on this detour baby from my Paris office. We'll see what they have to say." Not so good. A shifty chap, unscrupulous, soldier of fortune, wanted in Spain. They say he's supposed to have knocked off several guys who stood in his way. Nice pal to have. And here's his picture. Yep, that's the guy all right. And they say he's out after my scalp now. I've got his crowd blocked in South America, so he figures on ruining me. Nerve, though. Comes to my home as my guest so he can work from the inside. Daddy sets the papers on fire so nobody else can read them, while saying, "Well, that's the guy the missus says is a gentleman. We'll just give him a little rope and see if he can keep from getting his neck snarled up in it." On Saturday, Daddy and the Count are both sitting down. Daddy's smoking a pipe while the Count is smoking a cigarette. Daddy says, "Well, Count, the missus has been telling me all about you. She says you've got the big business of Europe in your vest pocket." The Count, looking amused, says, "Oh, hardly that. Mrs. Warbucks is very flattering. I will admit some of my more recent ventures have been rather fortunate, but I am still a long way from my goal, I assure you." Mr. Warbucks gets up. He says, "Well, Count, it's a pleasure to have a real businessman around. Just make yourself at home. The place is yours. I've got to run into town this afternoon." The Count says, "You are very kind." After Mr. Warbucks leaves the room, he says to himself, "So he came all the way over here to take me, eh? At first I was going to kick him all the way home again, but I've changed my mind. I'm going to let that baby hang around here till he gets good and ripe, and then pick him."